Running SolrCloud utilizing Hortonworks HDFS. This presentation will demonstrate how you can configure the Solr binary so that you can reuse them any number of times to create any number of SolrCloud collections or instances. On top of that, I will also show you how you can configure a SolrCloud instance so that it can store this index in HDFS rather than in the server local file system. The agenda for today, I will give you a brief introduction about myself, show you the demo, and then go or talk about the bash startup script that I will be using during this presentation to start and stop a SolrCloud instance, and then provide some resources that you can reference at a later date. In this demo, you're going to need Solr version 4.10.3. You're also going to need Zookeeper version 3.4.6, and also you need to download the Hortonworks HTTP 2.2 from their website. On top of that, you can go to my GitHub account and you can actually look at the script that I will be using today in this demo. And if you're interested, you can also look at the slides at the slideshare.net website under my account. Don't worry about trying to write down the URLs. I copy and paste this information under the YouTube video description part, so you can just either copy and paste or you can just click on the link. So without further ado, let's do the actual demo. If you draw your attention to my desktop, you're going to see three folders. You're going to see a logs folder, a Zookeeper version 3.4.6, and the Solr version 4.10.3. The Zookeeper and the Solr folder, those are the binaries that you can download directly from the Apache website, and right now they are untouched. So let's proceed and let's start with Zookeeper. The first thing we need to do is configure the Zookeeper instance or server, so that we can use it with our SolrCloud instance. So what we need to do is go into the Zookeeper folder under the conf directory, and we need to make a copy of the zoo_sample.cfg, and then let's just paste it under the same directory, and we need to rename it to zoo.cfg. Once you have done that, we need to go and modify this file. If you draw your attention to the following parameter name, the data dir, by default is set to temp Zookeeper. What this means is that this is the directory that Zookeeper will use to store a snapshot or the collections that it's going to oversee for any of these SolrCloud instances that we use for this Zookeeper. What I like to do, instead of just using the Zookeeper directory, I like to add a subfolder called data, right? And then on top of that, the port number, instead of using 2181, I like to use 9181. Once you do that, that's all we need to do. The next step we need to do now is close this window, go to a terminal, and go under the temp directory. Notice there's no files in there. And we need to create a Zookeeper folder. And under that Zookeeper folder, we need to create a data folder. That will reference the path that we just specified on the zoo.cfg configuration file. Next, now we need to start Zookeeper. So since my folder is on my desktop, I will go to the Zookeeper folder under the bin directory, and here you're going to see several files that you can use. The one we're interested in is the ckserver.sh, so I will do sudo ckserver.sh, and normally here I'm doing it as root. It is my local box, so it's just, for demonstration purposes. You may just create either a Solr account or maybe a Zookeeper account that you can use to start and stop your Zookeeper instance. So to start Zookeeper, you just specify the command ckserver.sh start, put in my password. and zookeeper starts. If for some reason you need to stop it, you just do same command, but instead of start, you just do stop. And zookeeper is now stopped. But since we need it, we want to start it. There it is. Okay, so at this point, we just configured zookeeper and we actually started the actual zookeeper instance. Since this is a demo, normally you will have a quorum that consists of an odd number, either 3 or more servers. But since it's just a quick demonstration, I only have one zookeeper. The next one we need to do or modify is the Solr folder. And what the first thing we want to do now is what I like to do is to delete the docs folder, because for the most part I don't reference that folder at all. So, but if you want to keep it, that's perfectly fine. A lot of the changes that we're going to make will take place under the example folder. So in here, you will notice, make this a little wider, taller. We need to, before we start deleting anything, we need to make the following modifications. The first thing we need to do is go under the Solr folder and then go on the collection 1, and we need to make a copy of the const folder and then paste that onto your desktop or to a location that you can reference later on. In this case, I'm just going to do everything on my desktop. Once you do that, the next part is we need to take the Solr.xml and copy or move it, whatever you want to do, to the example folder. Right, so now we just did that, and now we can start deleting the folders that we really don't need. We will start with the example folders. We can get rid of these 3. Move to trash. Next, we can delete the logs folder. So before I delete this folder, I want to draw your attention to the logs4j file. In this file, we need to actually modify it. So we need to get rid of we don't want to use the console. If you want to keep it, it's perfectly fine. I just don't like using it since I'm writing to the physical log file. But the big change that we need to make is the following. We need to actually comment out this line, the Solr.log parameter, and we're going to actually, instead of hard coding a path, we actually going to pass it a parameter when we start our SolrCloud collection that will specify where the log should live that we want to write to. So I like to use Solr.logging. This is just my preference, but you can call it anything you like, and I will show you in my script where I reference or where I pass in this value. So just remember that we are modifying the login feature for Solr. So rather than to just write to the logs folder under the example directory, we're now going to tweak it so that we tell it where we want it to write. So now we close this file. Sorry. And then we go back to the example. So we modify that log4j.property file. And now we can get rid of the logs folder because we don't need it, because we're going to actually specify the location for the log for each collection and for each shard in that collection. We delete the logs folder. We can delete the multi-core folder. And the next one is optional. You can delete the script folder. You can keep it. It doesn't matter. I like to delete it because I don't use any of those scripts. And lastly, we can get rid of the Solr folder. And that's essentially what we just done now. We just actually configure the Solr binary so that we can reuse them multiple times. There is one more thing that we need to do. We need to actually create or introduce a new folder called cores. And this is the folder that we're going to actually dynamically create in a course.property file that instructs Solr, a SolrCloud instance, how many shards a collection should have, how many, which schema file you want to use, which Solr config file you want to use, and there's other parameters that you can specify there. Excuse me, but for the most part, those are the values we're going to use for this parameter, and I will show you that in the script. Once you do that, we are pretty much ready to go. Lastly, I want to draw your attention to the logs folder. For now, it's empty. So what ended up happening is, if you notice that we modified the log4j.property file, where every time we start a SolrCloud instance, we are going to instruct each shard where that log file for that specific shard should live. And in this case, I'm just pointing it to my local file system under that logs folder. It is up to you where you want to put it at. The next step is we need to go under the cons folder that we copied from the Solr collection 1 directory, and we need to actually modify the Solr config.xml file so that it can make use of the HDFS directory. So I will make this wider, and we need to actually search to make it easy for you for the direct factory. And what we need to do is we need to replace the following content with the information that I have on my GitHub account, or you can actually pull this information from the reference guide on the Solr that you can download from the Apache Solr website. So if I draw your attention to my GitHub account, there is a repository called SolrCloud Hortonworks HDFS. And in this directory, I want to focus on the solrconfig_modification.txt file. Click on that link. This is the content that we need to copy into the Solr config. Actually, do this. Yeah. Copy that. And we need to copy this piece of information to the Solr.xml file under the cons folder that we place on the desktop. Okay, so we're back to the Solr config file, and what we need to do is delete this piece, and now we need to paste the text that we just got from the GitHub Solr config modification.txt file. Notice that when I paste it, it's not nicely aligned. If you like, you can do that yourself, but it doesn't need to be at the moment. I will leave it as is. I'll let you modify it to your liking. So I'll save that file, and pretty much now we have done everything we need to do to make Solr make use of HDFS. I won't go into detail about each of these parameters. Most of that information is in the reference guide. But if you have any questions, you can actually just send me an email, and I do my best to answer them in a timely fashion. My email address I will provide at the end of this presentation. So now let's go back to our desktop, and pretty much right now what we did is just decouple the binaries from the configuration files for Solr and just the binaries. So now what I like to do is the following. Okay, now I will open up a new terminal, and I mentioned at the beginning that you need to download the Hortonworks HTTP 2.2 version of their VM that you can download for free. And what I need to do now, I have a separate machine running that VM, and in anticipation of this presentation, I just kind of set up everything so that I can just copy and paste. So here what I'm going to do, I'm going to SSH to that Hortonworks HDFS VM, Hortonworks VM, and the password you need to use is root, the username is root, and the password is Hadoop. So without further ado, we'll put in that information, and password is Hadoop. So now I'm connected to the VM, and if you look at the following, which we have to complete, you will notice right now that I actually created a directory called SolrCloud. This is the directory where I'm actually going to host or put all my indexes in HDFS. If you go under that directory, you will notice there's nothing in there right now at the moment. So now all I did essentially prior to this demo, all I went in there and I just created this directory at the root level. You can create it anywhere you want. Actually, you might want to do something like user/Solr, and under there create your directory structure. But for now, all we need to do is specify the root level in HDFS where we want the index to reside. Next, I will then open a new tab. So keep in mind I will have the Hortonworks VM connection here, and this is my local machine. And now I'm ready to actually start a SolrCloud instance. So what I'll do now is, again, in anticipation for this demo, I kind of cheated a little bit, and I have a script that I created that I'm actually going to reference via this shortcut, start Hortonworks SolrCloud. And the script requires six parameters. It's actually the collection name, the number of shards, the port number that it should use, the schema that I want to reference that is going to point to the counts folder here, the JVM count. In this case, it will be 2, so there will be a collection called books, and it will have 2 shards, and there will be no replicas. If I want any replica, I will increase this to 4, and shard 1 will have a leader and a replica, and shard 2 will have a leader and a replica. And the last parameter is the Solr config.xml file, and that's all it takes. So if I go and paste that here, and let me get this, make this a little wider, you will notice, put in my password, my script will actually just start the SolrCloud instance, and this is the part of the command that actually starts each shard and points to the HDFS. So now if I go to a web browser, let me show you this here, and let's open a new tab, localhost 7500 Solr. This is the instance that we just started, and the collection is called books. Right? If we want to do another one, I can actually cheat a little bit again, and what I'll do is, let's call this one, I don't know, it's called movies, if you want to index movies. And let's make this one 3 shards. We actually have to start with a different port. We can use the same schema.xml file or a different one as long as it resides in the cons folder. And we will have no replicas. And if we hit enter, right, it will start 3 JVM. This is 1, 2, and 3. And if I go to a web browser here, and then I refresh, you will notice now I will have a new collection called movies with 3 shards, 3 leaders, and we still have books. If for some reason we want to start a third one, and I'm doing this on purpose so that I can show you when we go into the HDFS directory, let's do another one, and let's do 2 shards. And let's call this, let's call it Java code. How's that? And do 9500, same concept, and let's have some replicas in this case. So we hit enter. Just wait till everything is done. And we go to a browser. And if I refresh, you will notice that we have Java code with 2 shards. Each one, actually let me refresh and make sure that everything's up in green. And the reason you saw the different color is because Zookeeper is still in the process of registering all the different shards. So we here, the Zookeeper that we started is managing or overseeing 3 collections. It's overseeing books, movies, and Java code. Each collection is independent from the other and is comprised of multiple indexes. So books is comprised of 2 shards, only has 2 leaders. Movies is comprised of 3 shards, has 3 liters, and the Java code collection is comprised of 2 shards, 2 liters, and 1 replica. Okay. Okay. Now, if I draw your attention to the Hadoop, to the Hortonworks VM, now we can actually check the SolrCloud folder, and you will notice that we have 3 new folders in there. Before we had nothing, now we have 3. And each one is the name of the collection that we created. If we go under books, you will notice that will have 2 additional folders called shards, because that collection comprised of 2 indexes. If we do the Java code, you will see that one is comprised of 4, because that was the one that had 2 liters, 2 replicas. And lastly, if we do the movies, there it is. You have three shards, because it was comprised of 3 shards. So essentially right now, the SolrCloud is running on my local machine, but the actual index resides within HDFS. Next, I want to draw your attention to the logs folder. So the logs folder, you will notice now that it contains 3 folders as well. Each folder contains a number of subfolders. And in this case, because the books collection was comprised of 2 shards, you will have a log file for each shard. Same thing applies for the Java code that was comprised of 4. And you will see there's a log file for shard 1, a log file for shard 2, 3, and 4. If we look at the movie folder, same thing, right? And the purpose we do this is because we don't want to write to a single Solr log file. We want to essentially compartmentalize each log file per shard, because it makes it easy for debugging in the event there is some issue with one of your shards, or let's say the index. You can actually debug and just look at the errors for a specific shard versus trying to find it in a big massive log file. So in my script, what I do is essentially when I start each shard, I specify the location for each shard. On top of that, I don't have to specify. All I need to do for HDFS, unlike when you do local file system configuration, all I need to specify is just the parent folder, which is SolrCloud, and then the rest is done by the configurations of Solr. Okay, so now that we're done with the demo, let me talk about what we did. So we went into the Solr directory, and anything that's in red under the example directory, we actually deal away with. And then on the right hand side, anything that's in green is what we introduce. If you remember, we actually copied the solr.xml file from the Solr directory under the example folder, and we also created the cores folder where we dynamically create the cores.property file through my script, and I will show you that in a few minutes. And lastly, we copy the conf folder from the Solr folder collection 1 directory into my desktop. And normally you want to put that in a location where you can reference that and introduce new schemas and new Solr config.xml and create subfolder where you can organize your schema in the Solr config.xml file to your liking versus putting everything under one directory. Next, I want to draw your attention to the parameters that I use in my script. I will talk to them at a high level. So the key one is the solr.home. That's essentially the binary location. That would be the example folder. The solr.hdfs.home, that is essentially pointing to the SolrCloud on the Hortonworks HDFS VM. The Solr log type needs to be set to HDFS. On the actual Solr config.xml file is set to native. You can actually modify it. I don't like to do that. I just like to pass the parameter and override that value when I start the instance. The CK host is essentially the zookeeper instance that we modify and started. The host value is the actual the value that gets displayed on the cloud image. That will be the values you see here, localhost, localhost. So if I didn't specify that the host parameter, by default, Solr will put in the IP address of the machine or the server that is hosting that individual shard. I like, since I'm doing everything local on my machine, I just set it to localhost. But if you have a cluster of multiple servers, you can configure it that way. That instead of seeing the IP address, you can see the Solr name. The server name, which will make more sense. The next parameter is the collection.config name. That is the name of the collection, such as books, Java, and movies. The bootstrap conf directory is the conf folder that we copy to the desktop. That way we don't have to be depending on the one that's within the Solr binaries. The num shards is the number of shards for each collection. The Solr data dir is essentially the parameter that we specify where the index for that specific shard should reside. And then the jetty port, the stop port, and stop key are parameters that are specifically for each shard in the jetty that you can stop specifically by port. And that's something you can look at the stop script, which is very self-explanatory, and I won't go into great detail. And lastly is the Solr.logging parameter. That is that parameter we modify on the log4j.properties, and we pass that value in our Java command that where we instruct that a specific shard where the log will reside. And that's, if you remember, in the my desktop logs folder, we had a logs folder and a shard under each collection for each shard associated to that collection. Okay, so here we have the script that I execute to start the SolrCloud instances that I showed you just in my demo. As I mentioned, it requires 6 parameters. The collection name, number of shard, the jetty port we want to start with. So if you remember, the first one was 7500, 2 shards. You will notice that it'll be 7500 and 7501. So it just increments it by the number of shards that you want to have. Next, we provide the port number, the schema. In this case, we use the schema.xml, but if you're not tied to that, you can reference any other schema as long as you have the file name and it resides within the conf folder that we copy to the desktop. The jetty server count. This is the number of jetty instances we're going to have. So if you have 2 shards and you specify 2, you will have only I'll show you here. For books, we only did 2 shards and 2 JVM servers, or jetty servers, I'm sorry. So you have no replicas. The one that had a replica was the Java code where we specified 2 shards, but then the jetty server count was 4. So essentially you have 2 leaders, one in black dots, and then 2 replicas for each collection. So I'm sorry, shard 1 will have a leader and a replica, and shard 2 will have a leader and a replica. And lastly, we specify the config, which is the Solr config.xml file, or anything you want to pass. And next, I have a virtual machine underscore IP, and this is the IP to the VM that is hosting the Hortonworks HDP 2.2. I have some parameters that point essentially to my desktop, and then let me see, here's where I specify the Solr HDFS home. As I mentioned to you, one of the parameters is that, where I specify SolrCloud, and I don't need to do anything else. And then I decide what I want to name the folders for the log. If you remember, I had under the logs folder, there will be shard underscore log, and I can show you that real quick. If you see here, so if we have books, shard log 1, Java, shard log 1, 2, 3. I just increment it. And then movies, Same concept. And the same thing will apply to the sharding convention for HDFS. Let me see. And then the Jetty stop port. And what I want to draw your attention, this is the output that I display. And here's where I modify the core.properties under the course folder that we created. So every time I execute the script, I delete whatever is in there. And then I create a new file with the right properties, with the schema, the name of the collection, let's mention the schema, and also the Solr config and so on. Let me see what else. And then here, actually, this is what starts each SolrCloud instance. In this case, I just specify, so on the first run that I pass by, I only need to specify the conf folder or the bootstrap conf directory, which is the conf folder on my desktop. And the other parameter is the num shards. I don't need to specify that again on the second go round. So if I have 2 shards, the first shard will execute this command, but any subsequent command will execute here. And notice that this command is almost identical to the one above, minus the bootstrap confter and num shard. The reason why is because we don't need to specify, simply because at the very top I have a Solr Java apps, and I'm specifying the collection. So when the second shard starts, it just gets that information directly from Zookeeper. Now you can specify the bootstrap confter and the num shards on the second part here if you like, but it's not recommended. It's overkill because it will actually instruct Zookeeper to reload the comps information. So you don't need to do none of that. But in a nutshell, this is essentially the script that starts in the SolrCloud. And if you're interested on how to stop a collection, it's the same concept here. It's even a simpler script. With that said, I hope that this information was informative. And if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out to me either via YouTube by posting some comments. If not, then just send me an email directly. But before that, I just want to again point out some resources. Obviously, you can look at the material on my website. I'm sorry, on the website, on the GitHub, and also the presentation slide. The Zookeeper and Hortonworks and Solr, where you can download the information. But one of the important reference guides that you might want to use is the Solr that's on the Apache website. I think is very informative, and I often reference it whenever I need to get some information. So good luck, and hopefully this little bit of knowledge that I share will help you get up and running with SolrCloud on HDFS. Okay. And lastly, if as I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, just feel free to reach out to me. Send me an email to my Gmail account, gutierrezga00@gmail.com. Thank you again, and good luck.